I think the more we're going to need people to develop the internal skills, the emotional intelligence skills, the self-awareness, the situational awareness, the things that make us human. When we can connect to ourselves and our own humanity, we can connect to the people that we lead and also the client.
Only in real estate can you grind for 20 years, make millions, end up broke, miss every family dinner, get bossed around by your own team members, and think, I started with a dream and ended with a nightmare. You need Chevron Coaching. Austin and Nate Chevron, the cousins of coaching, will help and show you how to take back control. Go to chevroncoaching.com. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey, and today my guest is Mike Lee, the author of New Rules for the Future of Leadership from LA. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be here with you today.
Mike, we were connected by Devin out in Alaska because you had spoken at the Alaska Board of Realtors event. That's kind of a different world out there traveling from California?
It's very different, but also similar to Wisconsin, where I grew up in certain ways.
That's interesting.
Very rural.
Yeah. So you grew up in like rural Wisconsin, like out in the sticks?
Pretty much, yeah. Town of 15,000 people in the middle of nowhere.
So did you know the characters from Making a Murderer?
No.
Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, that was epic. I'm giving you a watching assignment tonight on Netflix, Making a Murderer, out in the sticks of Wisconsin. I guarantee you will know the players, at least of like the different parts, the different towns and everything like that. But that's what I think of when you said that.
You sound like you're giving me a recipe to not sleep tonight.
It is pretty eerie. It's 2 seasons long and it's, I think, still going on. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, Alaska, definitely you have that going for you, but cool connections out there. Devin's one of our best, and I'm excited to talk to you. You were talking on stage, and your background is mindset, but specifically from coaching in basketball arena. Tell us about your basketball background.
So I played high school, college, and I ended up building this basketball training company out of my college apartment. My last year in school, I was finishing up school. I was assistant coach on the basketball team. And I started building this training program from there. And it went from a small little camp that we ran in my hometown to a training facility in Milwaukee to running camps quite literally across the world. And that was the first part of my life professionally.
Yeah. Yeah. Milwaukee's cool. I was actually born in Milwaukee. Fun fact for the show. They have some really cool little hole in the wall restaurants. Did you enjoy living in Wisconsin?
It was a good place to grow up. It was a good place to grow up. It was a good place to learn, to grow, and definitely have some great relationships and have had some amazing experiences from there. Yeah.
That's a good PC answer, Mike, for someone who's living in LA. I can tell. You're definitely loving your life now. If you chose to live out there, is very different. Well, your New Rules for a Future of Leadership. When we were emailing back and forth, your tagline in your email is really interesting. I think in your signature, it says, "The future of leadership is human." And so as I'm reading that, especially with, some of the AI conversations and digital world that is just growing and leaving half of the world in panic and the other half, I feel like, is excited about the future. You are cutting through the noise by saying the future of leadership is actually human. What does that mean to you?
You kind of alluded to it. I mean, it's in a world where we're surrounded by change and disruption, and AI has just infiltrated everybody's lives to a certain extent. And, whether people want to leverage it or they're afraid of it, it's here and it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. I think the more we're going to need people to develop the internal skills, the emotional intelligence skills, the self-awareness, the situational awareness, the things that are, the things that make us human, right? The advantages that we do have are our humanity. And when we can leverage that to show up as a better version of ourselves as a leader, I think it can help us solve problems, but also it's our way to connect with the people that we lead, right? But also the clients that we're trying to serve as well. It has an impact on everybody. When we can connect to ourselves and our own humanity, we can connect to the people that we lead and also the clients. And so it's an entire it's an entire like ecosystem, right? But we have to be able to do it for ourselves first.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, we've had some on the show, this very show, that are worried about AI taking jobs, worried about the legitimacy of some of if you can create an avatar that do things for you and you don't even know if you're talking to a human, that gets kind of scary. Some of the deep fakes that are happening on Instagram with these videos where they look extremely real, getting people to say things they never said. I think what's interesting is anytime you have an advancement in something that is taken for what could be evil, the silver lining or the hope that I have is there's just as many good people that are trying to attack the evil that comes out of an advancement like AI. At least that's the way I feel. Now, you came from basketball and you're running camps with professionals. I mean, you've worked with Steph Curry. I looked at your website. There's some big names that you've worked with historically. Tell me how basketball led to a quote like that being in your email. Like, is that something that kind of birthed out of a necessity from the people you were coaching?
Yeah, I think it was something that I observed from coaches that I had, coaches that I just knew in my network. And I also think it translates directly to business. It's like, there were coaches that were great with the X's and O's, and there were coaches that were great with relationships and building culture. And the ones that excelled at a really high level were the ones that were they were masters in both arenas. The X's and the O's and the Jimmys and the Joes, right? So I think when you take that to the business space, it's, you can be great with strategy, but the truth is like a 5-year business plan today can become irrelevant overnight. It's more so about how you are navigating the day-to-day, navigating the change and being able to adapt in a world that is constantly changing. And so is strategy important? Of course, right? We're not going to accomplish anything or build a successful business just, flying by the seat of our pants, but we need to also combine that with the ability to adapt and to navigate the change and the inevitable things that show up that are outside of our control. And, one way to be able to do that is, obviously be able to do it for ourselves, but also how do we manage the relationships at an emotional level with the people that we lead and the clients that we have.
So let's get back to the book. The four sub new rules for the future of leadership. You focus on 4 things: purpose, future focus, mindfulness, and heart-centered leadership. As you wrote your book, why were those the 4 different categories that you chose to focus on?
That's a good question. They were really, I kind of did this the opposite way that a lot of people would approach this, and they'll write a book and then they'll start speaking about it. I more so, those were pillars of things, those were commonalities and things that I was getting asked to speak about. And so I put the content together from my talks into a book. And so it was more so, what I was seeing from clients that I was working with, what I was seeing from the research from the Deloittes and the McKinseys and Gallups and all these other, the consulting firms, right, that are really at the forefront of a lot of the research in the world of work, and combine that with the experiences that I had from my basketball days and my own journey of navigating some adversity in my life.
I want to talk about that. How did you first get into the coaching side? Like, I'm always curious about some of the coaches that I don't think ever actually played basketball. Now, you did play basketball, but a lot of like top tier coaches, it's like it's either been a really long time since they played or they never did at all. How do you know you have a skill for leadership in a sport that you weren't good at? Like, not to say that you weren't, but like I'm sure you coach with a lot of people that are better coaches than they are actual players.
Yeah. So is the question like how can somebody who is not at the like that didn't play at an elite level become a successful coach? Is that
Yeah.
kind of
So I mean,
yeah.
I understand that understanding the game and architecting a good team and offense and things like that. I understand that that is good. At some point, in certain levels, I would have to think as an elite player, they look at the coach, and this is a bad attitude, but I know it exists where it's like, there's no way you could do these things you're asking me to do. You know what I mean? You get that attitude?
Yeah. No, that's I mean that definitely happens. And I think that's like there's a lot that I could say about that, but I think one thing is somebody who never, Steph Curry's like kind of an anomaly, but I look at, and I'll speak to the basketball world because I honestly don't have much experience outside of that. But I look at the game of basketball and like, to me, talent is a complete myth, right? You might be born with certain athletic traits that predispose you to being able to develop certain skills. But nobody's like a born shooter or a born whatever you want to call it. But there are people who are born athletes, right? Mm-hmm. And so that allows things within the game to come easier for them. So they don't necessarily have to master certain fundamentals or certain skills. Like, not to throw him under the bus, but like to me, LeBron James is a perfect example of that. Like, I don't think he's in the top 1% at any individual basketball skill. He's just a freak athlete who's just okay at a lot of things. Right. And so I think when you don't,
we're going to be, by the way, Mike, we're going to be getting a lot of hate mail. I appreciate that. Thank you. I've been missing out. We haven't gotten any emails lately. So thank you for stirring up the conversation again. Who do you think is the greatest? You mentioned Steph and LeBron. Who do you think is the greatest of all time? Let's start that. Let's get that going.
I think that depends on the era. I think you can't compare Jordan to Steph or LeBron, or, I just think it's dependent on the era. You look at guys right now who are playing, I look at some of the guys that I worked with that they're now playing overseas, mm-hmm. and they're like playing in EuroLeague, and they're playing in some of the top leagues in Europe. Like 20 years ago, they would have been NBA All-Stars. Right. So it's like the level of skills have just evolved rapidly, I feel
okay,
like.
So to that point, to what you're saying right now, you were basically saying skill or talent is a myth. And if you look at, let's say though, I mean, there definitely is an athleticism barrier. Like, I couldn't just today, or even 10 years ago, and maybe disagree, but I couldn't just work as hard as somebody else to get up to the point where I could be an NBA player. Do you believe that like anyone could be in the NBA? I don't think that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying that at all. No.
All right. So then let's take a team right now. Let's take a team, a young team across the board, and say, starting now, depending on how much they work, they could literally go down as the greatest of all time or someone that no one has ever heard of. Is that along the lines of what you're saying based on work ethic?
I think that's a component of it. Yeah. And it depends on the age that you get them at. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it comes down to access to resources, but also level of expertise of coaching and being able to develop players. I'm not talking about basketball. I haven't done this show in a long time. But tying it to, I think this originally stemmed from you were asking about coaching.
Yeah.
And I do think that the coaches that invest in the relationships, there's three things that I talk about in the book that I had a coach, multiple coaches, but one specific example that I share is he did three things. Number one, he just communicated with me. He established a line of communication. That communication built a connection. That connection gave us, like, the dynamic between us had an incredible amount of trust, and that allowed him to challenge me. I think a mistake that a lot of leaders and coaches, leaders, coaches, parents, you put it across the board, is a lot of them go straight to challenging people before they communicate and connect with that person at a deep level. And I don't think that you can challenge somebody to be at their best, to push them to maximize their potential, unless you communicate and connect with them first.
Yeah. I think there is a method to my madness, by the way, Mike. I'm not just asking random questions. If we allude to who we're speaking to, we're talking to the residential real estate world, and you'll have certain models where the coaches at the top will have never sold homes, and there's a lot of people that push back on that. They're like, "Why would you coach with someone?" I personally, after interviewing thousands of these people, I think you need both. I think you need to have coaches, or at least mentors, that have done the thing at a high level and have been there before. I also think a coach that you have at the top, even outside the industry in some cases, that really help. I mean, everything that you're talking about in terms of mindfulness and heart-centered leadership, purpose, you don't need to do the thing in order to coach around that. It's more so like attitudinal coaching. So when you get up on stage and you start talking about that, what doors do you open up in their mind for making breakthroughs?
Well, I think, like, it comes from a couple of things. I think it comes from, sharing relevant stories. I think people connect to stories. And then I think it also comes from some of my own vulnerability on the stage, being able to share something that, to me, it's not vulnerable anymore because I've shared it so many times. But to other people, when you are vulnerable enough to share something that other people are going through to a certain level, or people that they love are going through to a certain level, I think that allows you to, going back to this humanity aspect, like, really connect to somebody's humanity. And I think it's in the vulnerability and the connection that you open people's minds and the breakthroughs come through. An example is, like, I pretty much not every talk, but a lot of talks I give, I speak on mindfulness, and that's kind of a woo-woo thing to certain demographics. And I feel like, because I am able to share my experience with it from a vulnerable way, I've been able to get people that you would never expect to pick up a mindfulness practice to open their mind to it, to be curious about it, to ask about it.
Because they relate to your story?
I think because they relate to the story, but I also make it, like, practical. And I make it accessible and something tangible that they experience.
Let's go there. Let's talk about your story, because you mentioned that in the pre-show, and you said you end up talking a lot about mental health, and you had mentioned Wayne Solomons, a mutual friend of ours, who also speaks on the topic. What about your story has you speaking more and more about mental health?
I don't think there's necessarily anything, like, special about my story. I just think I'm just willing to talk about it. And I think, I think the stats are one in every 5 people in the US is dealing with some sort of mental health challenge. 40% of CEOs are dealing with depression. So they're like, it's a prevalent thing. And I think beyond all of the, all the things that you can do from a like therapy standpoint, or a, whatever you want to call it, the work standpoint, right? Like mindsets, or doing, more in-depth trauma, not training, but trauma, like processing through, like, EMDR, or through brain spotting or certain things. Like the one thing that I've learned is that there's a lot of healing that can take place through an authentic connection, where by sharing your own journey and stories, other people can see themselves in that story in some way, shape, or form, and think, yeah, me too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way, and that can make other people feel seen and heard.
Yeah. Are there any details about your past that tend to come up more than often? Like, to share a little bit of your story so you can tell us what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I dealt with depression growing up my whole life. That's literally why I moved from Wisconsin to California, because I used to get stupid depressed during the winters. Talking not getting out of bed till 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon level of depression.
Wow.
And
that's a real thing. So not to minimize that. So that's a real thing. I mean, that right there is a difference maker, just being in a place that doesn't have that brutal of a winter. You feel like a lot of people in the Midwest deal with that?
I do. And I think a lot of people, especially if you grew up there, you don't necessarily realize how much of an impact it has on you because it's just all you've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, some people it doesn't affect at all. I think I don't know the exact details behind it, because I think it's a complex thing. It's not just this, well, if there's, we don't see sun for 7 days, then you get depressed automatically. It's not like that. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of people, whenever I share this story to an audience in the Midwest or from the East Coast or Northeast or whatever, like there's so many people that connect to it.
Yeah, they immediately buy a beach house.
Yeah.
No, there's some truth to it, though. I mean, I every single winter I'm in Indianapolis, and it's not even nearly as cold as like Minnesota, Wisconsin, parts of Michigan, Dakotas. Every winter, the older I get, there's a day or two where I'm like, why am I still here? It's that brutally cold. Now, here's what's interesting to me, and we got a few minutes here. You are an accomplished writer, speaker. You get on stage and you speak. You do a job that 95% of the world can't do. They hate public speaking. You're a high producer, and yet something is, I guess, not to minimize it, but the winter itself kept you down. If you were to coach someone right now who doesn't have the means to just move, they can't just go to California, and yet you can tell like winter is actually impacting. This is it. I didn't know we'd go here, but this is interesting. If you can tell you're coaching someone who winter's impacting and they can't move, how do you get them to be a top performer and get over that?
I would say there's 4 things that come top of mind for me. This is going to sound ridiculous, but one of the things my last few years that I was there that really moved the needle for me was I would hop in tanning beds.
Like, really?
Yeah, like maybe 3 times a week, and I would go in for like, if it was a 10-minute bed or 20-minute bed, I'd be in there for half of the time only, because I just didn't want those things they can be intense, right? They're not like exactly 100% safe, but I was like, this is way better than what I'm dealing with. Like, I'll deal with whatever the repercussions of this are later, because it helps. Like the vitamin D that you get is similar to the sun, and it definitely helps. So
it was definitely the vitamin D. It wasn't like having a tan. Did that help too? Like how you felt about your skin, how you looked, like, did that help too? Or was it more the vitamin D?
I've never had anybody ask me that. No, I think it's just the vitamin D.
No, I'm telling you, there's something to be said for like looking good. Like it might sound silly. You said it, not me. But like, if you wake up every day, like during COVID, we saw it. If you wake up every day, you don't put on clothes, you put on a shirt to be in front of people on camera, you don't do your hair, then all of a sudden for a while, that's how serious you start taking yourself. And then and I literally started dressing up to go to work and not knowing I would not see anyone because I took myself seriously. Now we're talking about the tan and everything like that, but I think there's something to be said for that. If people feel good about the way they look, they're willing to put effort into it. I think that's better for yourself than not caring at all. Anyway, I digress. Keep going.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's some truth to that for sure.
But for you, it was vitamin D.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, like supplementation didn't work, like with omega-3s and not omega-3s. Yeah, omega-3s and like fish oils and things
fish
like
oil,
that. You have like a lot of vitamin D. Didn't help. It was the sun. So I'd say number one, tanning beds. Number two, I would say schedule human connection. So one thing that I was just thinking about this the other day that I would deliberetely schedule when I was going through some of these times where I was like, I've worked for myself my whole life. Mm-hmm. And so the only reason I got out of bed at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on some of those days was because I had to go to our gym and work kids out. Right. Yeah. So when I was going through some of those periods where it's really rough, I would schedule morning meetings with people outside, not on Zoom, not phone calls, like outside of my place to force myself to like get in some of that human connection. That's the second thing. The third thing is prioritize exercise. Especially for me, it was, high intensity interval training or something where you're like really getting a good sweat in and getting your energy up. Mm-hmm. That can help. And I'd say the fourth thing is like really look at your nutrition. Like, what are you putting into your body? What are you feeding what we eat literally becomes the cells of our body, which are the foundation of how we function. Right. So really look at what you're consuming.
I love it. I mean, 3 of the 4 were taking care of your body. And I think that goes so overlooked. The first thing I tell people to do when they're in a funk or feeling depressed or sad or anything is work out. Go for a run, get out, sweat. Motion creates the emotion. I feel like there's a commonality between top level thinkers like yourself, top performers, where you have to lead with taking care of yourself physically, which actually impacts the mental, it impacts the mindfulness and all the other things that you talk about in your book. And it's not easy. Maybe you really are struggling to get out of bed but it's simple. And so if you can give simple, practical, hey, do this, just make your bed and go work out and start there. And you start to follow that and you believe that. I feel like a podcast like this really helps people. So that's all the time we have for Mike. I like your focus on that. And again, we started with the future of leadership as human. I think throughout the show, we really talked about that. Where can we find you? If you're a speaker, you speak on a lot of stages, you write another book. Where can we find Mike Lee?
Hanging out online, mainly on Instagram and LinkedIn at Who Is Mike Lee, and also mindshiplabs.com.
I love it. Who is Mike Lee? That's all the time we have. Thanks for joining us. If you want to impact who we have on the show or what we talk about, email us at podcast@realproducersmag.com. We'll see you next time.